Genesis 11. What are, if we're trying to share at the beginning here, what are some reasons that you would give to not move away from where you grew up? What are some reasons to not move away somewhere else? Just stay where you grew up. Family, probably the biggest one, right? Very good. So family's one. Excellent. Job, right? Good. Got a job here. Church. Yeah. Doctors. You got your doctors. Yeah. Definitely.
You know the area well.
You know the area, right? That's not for nothing, right? Any other reasons for not moving away? Right? Got your friends. Very good. Excellent. Okay. And then, of course, all those could probably be reasons for moving, right? What, I don't know what the answer here is. I mean, I have an answer, but you might have a different one, and that's okay. In having that family, in having a church, in having a job, in knowing the geography of a location, in having friends, what in all of those collectively, what do they represent? What do they symbolize? What do they mean? So we say, I don't want to move because there's these things. So then what does that mean?
I'm guessing you're gonna say, maybe I'm wrong. Community, you're gonna say? No.
Well,
Really thought I nailed it.
no, that's a really good single word to put them all under. So then the repost is, what does community mean?
Connection, love, familiarity, home. I'll keep going.
These are all great. These are great. It's both, yeah. I mean, there's love, right? So then we ask the fun question, well, what is love? I'll give you every freshman Comp 101's answer when the paper is what is love. Are you ready? It's the feeling. You can't control it. Good luck with life, right? It's that feeling you get, it's just all inside. Like, oh man, what kind of world are you living in? Good morning. You're fine. Good morning. This will not be as fun as Jonah Kagan, I'm sorry. But we can do body surfing. I will jump. Can you catch me? Which reminds me, on a side note, in college, the school we went to had this massive church auditorium where thousands and thousands of people gathered. But their stage was massive. It was huge. It was way off the floor. And one day in college chapel, the student body government at the time got a group of us together, and they said, okay, you guys stand down here at the front of the stage. The student body president is going to jump off the stage. You're going to catch him. We're like, yeah, we'll do that. And sure enough, he committed. He dove full body stretch. We were all kind of still talking. So we caught him, and then we didn't catch him. And his head hit the floor. And the floor of the church was just red carpeted concrete. His eyes rolled in the back of his head, and he went out. We helped him out, and his girlfriend was not happy. She chewed us out. Sorry, Sam. Felt bad for the guy, all right? So community, right? It means love and familiarity and purpose. Very good, right? What is purpose? I mean, it's everywhere, right? It's on bumper stickers, it's on shirts. But what is purpose?
It's what you do, it's the reason you do what you do.
It is the thing you do, right? And the motivation for the thing, right? And we as human beings have to have a purpose. even if it's a small purpose, right? Kurt Vonnegut, the famous story writer, would say, when you're writing a story, your character has to have at least one thing he or she wants, even if it's a glass of water, right? Because it represents purpose. And there's something intrinsic about the human being, the way we've been designed. I think the argument is that we've come from a being who is purposeful, right? God's existence has a purpose. He has a purpose for what he does. But the reason I ask about why we might not move away is because to move away from these things that we have, right, it is a source of, we know that that's where we're loved. We know that there's some sort of purpose that we have. Even in the home, the young child learns, it's time to clean up my room, and this is the job I have. They discover this is mom's purpose, this is dad's purpose, this is grandmom's purpose, this is the jobs that I have to fulfill, right? There's also safety in there, right? And the reason I ask these questions is we're going to move into this chapter, and most of us are familiar with this story of the Tower of Babel. And we know that the people sinned in not dispersing across the earth. But it is worth considering, well, what are some maybe valid reasons why they shouldn't leave? I mean, this is an ancient world. It's not been mapped out yet. You don't know what's on the other side of that hill. You don't know if there's going to be water. You don't know if there's going to be dragons. You don't know what there's going to be, right? So it's better to just stay here. So let's look at chapter 11 here, verse 1. It says, the whole earth at this time was of one language and of one speech. Now, language is pretty fascinating. Human beings don't only think in language. We think in symbols, right? But those symbols start to represent a type of language, right? If we have an image in our head, we have to in some way put words to it to help us know what it means, right? But language, what is also fascinating about language is it's connected to our consciousness. It's connected to our intellect. It's connected to our very being. We come from the Word, right? The Word that would put on flesh. But they're all of one language. They're all of the kind of the same way of thinking. And then the word speech here is they all speak the same, right? All of us speak English in here, correct? Right. But our speech is not necessarily the same. We have some various dialects, accents, slang, right? But at this time, we have a group of people, all of the population of the world, however many there are at this time, thousands for sure, because this is this is well after the flood. People have the same way of thinking. They have the same way of speaking. We have a representation or an example of the ideal unification. And this is one thing that community represents, right? We are unified. We're united. We are all on the same page. We all have the same goal. We're all working towards the same thing. So when we get down to chapter 11, verse 1, they're all the same language. They think the same. All of one speech. They speak the same. Verse 2, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east, this is where Mount Ararat, where the ark has landed, and they're moving out from there, and several commentators, David Guzik being one, if you check out his commentary on the Mount Ararat, he just has a massive list of archaeological eyewitness accounts of that boat is up there on the mountain. The ark was a real thing, right? We are reading about real people. Okay, so they journey from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar. If I'm not mistaken, this is up around the area known as Persia and Babylon, right? And we'll come to that in a second. And this is where they dwelled. Verse 3, and they said one to another, go to. And this means, let's do this, right? Pay attention to that phrase. It's going to get repeated 3 times. They say, go to, let us make brick, burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. This is probably one of the oldest occupations in the world, right? If you're going to make brick and build buildings, you are connected to one of the oldest occupations, right? Second would be prostitution, but we don't need to do that, right? Okay. Farming's another one. Verse 4, and they said, go to, let's do it. Let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven. Now we get some ideas of why they want to do this. And let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Okay. So they want to make a city, right? And the city, in the Hebrew word, the word city is connected to the idea of you must be on guard. So this is post-flood. The fall of human nature is well embedded into who we are. So people are still doing things they shouldn't do. We still can't trust people completely. We don't know what's out there. We know that the animals are afraid of us. They can attack us. So why don't we stay here and stay safe? That is a valid argument, right? And many of us sometimes, as we talk about, well, we shouldn't move away, and we probably shouldn't. It's one of the great tensions in our cult, in the American culture right now, is there was generations of you grow up and you go out for some good reasons. And then small communities are dead. And now there's some trends in other communities are just stay where you are because you need to build roots. We need to stay connected. We don't need to get disconnected. And yet we cannot, as believers, underestimate what does God say to us. Maybe the call is stay here, stay put. While the world is saying you have to go do and be big and be known, God's might stay right where you are. On the other hand, God's call might be you have to go out. I mean, I think often of our pastor and his wife. They are not living where they grew up. And their first job was all the way down in Florida. And then here, still hours from home. That was the call of God in their life. So it is important to understand what God's call is on our life. It might be to go, it might be to stay. How can we know God's call for our life in that direction if we're not paying attention, if we're not listening, if we don't have good counsel? And the reason I bring out specifically what does God say, because God has already told the people, be fruitful and multiply, spread out throughout all the earth. And what do these people do? They do the exact opposite. For good reason. Let's stay here. It's safe. This plane is pretty good. There's water here. And then we understand what they want to do. Let's build a city. Let us build a tower. Let us make us a name. This is tied to let us be known for what it is we've done. We want to be known. We want to be known for doing something pretty great, right? Think of all the social media accounts of all the influencers who want to be known for this is the best way to curl your hair. I'm not saying that this stuff is bad. I'm not saying it's bad at all, right? It is a way to stay connected. Think of all the social media influencers out there telling us this is the movie to watch or this is the book to read. These are the shoes to buy. Look at what I did today. Hashtag so blessed. Parentheses. Hashtag so prideful. Close parentheses, right? We want to be known for things. That is a natural desire. And again, that comes from we were made by a being who we ought to know, a being who wants to be known. So they say, let us build this city. Let's do all these things so we can be known for what we have done. And we do not want to be scattered abroad upon the face of the earth, right? Because we might lose connection with one each other. We don't know what's out there. Verse 5, and the Lord, this is capital L-O-R-D. This in the Hebrew is the name Jehovah. This is the name that means the existing one. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. Now, the tower that they builded would not literally reach up into the heavens. The consensus is that it was a tower that was going to be used primarily for two reasons. If something is high and lifted up, you can see it, right? So it would draw people's eyes, and we would know, look at that magnificent thing that they have built. It would be pretty bad if the Statue of Liberty got shipped over to us from France and it was this tall. There's something about the fact that she is so big, correct? The Washington Monument, right? If it's this big, it's a waste of time. But also this tower many people believed it was going to be used for the study of the stars, specifically for astrology. The belief that in the stars are the answers to the mysteries of life. And what's fascinating about that is God tells us in Genesis 2, the stars and the moon were to be there for signs, right? To understand the seasons. The sun was to be a light for the day, to let us know what was going on in the day. But all of those were ultimately to point people back to a creator. And we have these group of people who know the commandments of God. They're disobeying the commandments of God for valid reasons, though unsound. And now they want to do something to look back at what the creator has created, but not to stay connected to the creator, to get the knowledge for themselves so that they could be known. Look at what we have done. And this is one of the great tensions in the human being. Even if we do something good, are we properly motivated? And even if we do something good and are properly motivated and get recognized for it, how do we temper that pride and that ego that so easily creeps in and wants to take over? And this is something all of us have to deal with in this room. And I think again of C.S. Lewis, a story of C.S. Lewis near the end of his life on campus there, I think it was at Oxford, a young professor had recently taken over and become friends with Lewis. And they had met together, and Lewis asked the young professor, "You're meeting all the colleagues, you're meeting everyone. What do they say about me?" And the young professor said, "Well, they all have high respect for your intellect and all of your output," even though for the most part, C.S. Lewis was not respected by his colleagues for all the things that he wrote. I'll give you one guess why. Because he wrote about Christ pretty explicitly. At any rate, he said, they all have respect for your intellect and your work. They think you're pretty arrogant. And C.S. Lewis's response is, I've been dealing with that my whole life. Not, oh, the hater's going to hate. It was, I know I'm arrogant. And I've really got to deal with that. So God comes down and says, here's what they have made. I mean, so we have an ancient world in which people want a name and want to be known. We have not changed much. This is still the human condition. Me. What can we do? Lift our name up, right? And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have one language. And this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. We have an example of people united, and I use that word specifically because we hear that word a lot today. We have to be unified, and we ought to be. But unified for what? Because in a extreme version, any story or film you watch with gangsters, they will always talk about loyal to the family, unity. We must be united. But united for what? I would say China's pretty united right now. Same with Russia. Same with Hamas and Hezbollah. But what are they united for? So when people start talking about coming together, we got to get together and get on the same page, we ought to sit back and say, for what? To deny the existence of a creator? To say that we can change our bodies in ways that are contradictory to nature? To say that we can deny reality? But when people do get united, we can do some pretty amazing things. People had to get together to make the Statue of Liberty, Washington Monument. But think of how well Hamas got coordinated. They did some damage, some horrific damage. And it is tragic that while in this country there are people standing up and speaking out for them, there are a lot of people united on college campuses around the country saying, death to Israel. They had it coming. They got what they deserved. And if we think about the book of Revelation, at the end of time, the whole world will be united. For what purpose? To act as if God does not exist and to destroy anyone who stands on his side. Specifically his chosen people, Israel. So we have an example of great unity to do something not right. Verse 7, now we have go to repeated. So it's one thing for humans to say, let's get together and do this. It's a completely different thing when God says, let's get together and do this. Because he is speaking to the Trinity, who is always on the same page and holy, without sin, omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent. So no matter how unified the number of people are, no matter how unified the heavenly hosts are who try to take the throne of God, that unity cannot overpower or usurp the unity of the holy triune God. And God says, let us go down and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. And all of us in this room, or a good number of us in this room, have had the experience where we've picked up the phone to call the gas company, the electric company, the computer company to get help, and we find ourselves speaking to someone who is speaking something that does not really pass for our language, right? This is not a knock on them. They're doing a job they need, right? They're probably broke and getting paid very little to dodge tax cuts, right? They're just trying to feed their family. But even as we're speaking the same language, if the accent is not right, if the dialect is not right, you cannot understand. And that leads to intense frustration. But think of in your own homes. We all speak the same language when we're miscommunicating, right? It is frustration. Now we lose connection. And when we lose those things, now we enter into fear, anger. And let's just go our separate ways. So when he changes their languages, verse 8, so the Lord scattered them abroad. The will of God ultimately trumps the will of man. Ideally, our will would be submitted to his. And that is what the Bible's trying to draw us to. You have the will of God, you have the will of man. This one is clearly better. Will this one, which is lower, submit to this one? Adam and Eve eventually submit after the fall. Abel submits. Shem submits. Noah submits. Cain does not. The line of Cain does not submit. Nimrod and his people will not submit. And there are times, we don't always know when that will be, when God will come in and step in and say, okay, now I'm going to do my thing. And we will see this at the end of time, when man will be completely united with the supernatural realm, completely united against God, the creator and his creation, and they will wreak havoc, and God will step in and say, okay, you have not submitted, my will still be done, and I will save those who have submitted to me, and those who haven't, you're going the way of eternal destruction. And here God says, he scatters them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, where Babel simply means incoherent speech, babblings. We have no idea what's going on. What I want to draw our attention to, well, let me finish out the verse. Because there the Lord did confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of the earth. There's that Hebrew poetic form. We say the same thing, just slightly different, right? God scattered them across the face of the earth. Across the face of the earth, God scattered everyone. It's supposed to, like a 1-2 punch, drive home whatever the idea is. Now, the people cannot understand themselves, but eventually they would start to find, oh, we speak the same language, let's get together, and now we've got to go out, right? God can still understand everything that's being said. And there's the last thing I want to end on with today. The humans were given a command. A large portion of them did not obey. In fact, some scholars speculate that when the Bible says that Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord, that he was not just a hunter of animals. He was a hunter of men. Literally hunted men to oppress them and bring them under his dominion. And the fact that he was a mighty hunter before the Lord is that he did this unabashedly, out in the open, I don't care. Now, if that's true or not, I don't know. But think about through human history, and we can even have, some of us have personal examples today of individuals who live in just open, flamboyant, unabashed sin. Who is God? Who even cares? I'm going to do my own thing. And Nimrod has some scholars have speculated he has in his power and in his strength, in his reputation, in his charisma, he has drawn people unto him, and by force he's drawn people unto them and said, this is where we will be. Now, some scholars have said the line of Shem was not complicit to this, that they tried to stay back, that they were living slightly elsewhere. Others have said, no, they were all kind of either brought under his rule by oppression or by coercion. And I think that that's highly likely when we look later on in the Old Testament with the Jewish nation. So many times God says, don't worship idols. Don't marry people who aren't Jews because you will end up worshiping idols. And what do? The exact opposite. For a variety of reasons, right? This is going to be a good political marriage. Solomon is that example. This will help us make good economic connections. Idolatry is everywhere. Maybe those gods can help us because they can a little bit. Everyone else is doing it. So why don't we just go along? Or if we're born into it and don't even recognize what's going on, right? So the people were told to go. We have this mighty leader. Nimrod is a type, a foreshadow of the Antichrist. I am mighty. I will draw people unto me. He's building this city. God comes down and changes the languages. What do we think God heard? When our lives are interrupted by God, and I use interrupted because we have our things to do, right? When God interrupts our life, what is our response?
Well, you can either go along with him,
Right.
or fight him, you know. So
Yeah,
that's your options.
those are your options. And there have been times where we've all probably gone along with it and gone along with it with such grace. Or we have fought it. Anyways,
But if you fight it, you lose every time.
you lose every time, right? You do. If you go along with it, you ultimately win, but you might not win in the eyes of man, right? So when the people's languages are changed, I've not come across any scholars touching on this. It was just a thought. What did God hear the people say? After the sense of frustration maybe wore out, did they step back and go, God has judged us? Or did they blame God? Or did they just, in the triumph of the human will, get together and let's go and forsake God completely? Because when God comes down and interrupts the human's life, if he does not annihilate them, because at the end of days, when he destroys all of his enemies, there is no time to turn back and say, please help me. But while there is still breath in the life of a human being, like the thief on the cross, who has an opportunity to go from a railer against Christ to truly you are the Son of God, and God says, today you'll be with me in paradise. When we have an encounter with God, as unpleasant as it might be, because he might touch us in a way like Job, where our body is wrecked, people are dead, we lose money, we lose all our status, and on top of that, our friends show up and ultimately accuse us of something we're not guilty of. But we're not all Jobs either. So sometimes when God checks us, body checks us, it's because we're like David who sinned with Bathsheba. Thou art the man. So what is our response? This isn't right. This isn't fair. Or I'm just going to go on my own way. Because the humans were still alive, they still had an opportunity to repent. We have another type of Garden of Eden here. They're not allowed to stay in Babel. They can't stay. They can't understand each other. So just like Adam and Eve leave the garden, these people have to leave the plains of Shinar. But Adam and Eve represent for us two people who, after their sin, repented and put their faith back in God, even though God didn't let them stay in the garden. We will have people leave the plains of Shinar, and some will say, we have sinned, we have been judged, and yet God is good, and we will leave, and we will still serve God. And it is likely that there were people in the plains of Shinar who knew that this was wrong, but had no power to get out of it. And when God judges them, they say, okay, God's intervened, he's worked his work, let's still trust God, and now we're going to move out. But I wonder how many people God heard actually repent, or others who just carried on in their will, in their way. Think of when it happens today. The earth gets touched in a way. What is the general response by the mass media? It's the human's fault. We are a pariah on the earth, destroying the earth. We will save the planet. You will not save the planet. Not that we shouldn't do our part, right? All the trash thrown out on the side of the road is a great example of that's not good. But we didn't make this thing. There's no way we are going to save it. In fact, environmentalists have come to discover over the last 20 years that they have come to discover that in the realm of environmentalism, one of the common traits among really intense environmentalists and those who are on the outskirts is anxiety. Do you want to know why? How well do you sleep at night when there's a problem you can't fix? And it's a problem that literally means the earth is going to melt. To borrow from the Bubble Boy, not too good. It is a crisis greater than we can handle. So he confounds the language, they've scattered abroad, and yet God still has given them an opportunity to repent. And we move into verse 10, we pick up with the generations of Shem. We will pick up here next week. There's a fascinating thing that these verses show. Two pretty fascinating things, and we'll get to those next week. One of them is we see that Shem is one who still submitted to the will of God. All right, we'll see you next week. Thank you.